My name's Penny Cooper. I'm the acting president of the Vancouver Hawks Field Hockey Club. I'm very happy to be here tonight talking with you guys about the organizational review we have been doing over the last 6 months or so. But more importantly, that's really context for what do we want to do from here. I'm very grateful for you coming on a big night of where you might be slightly distracted by other things that are slightly more important to the future of the Western world. I think we didn't quite twig to the date when we set the night, but I'm grateful for the time that you have to spend on this call to think about it, to think about the issues that we have that we can actually control. And you will be, at some point free to go back to that if that's what you're doing or whatever. Anyway, we're very glad to have you. So joining me in hosting this presentation and discussion are my fellow board members, Sarah Spencer and Mike Foxcroft, as well as our club manager, Alex Bale, I'm sure you all know. Also joining us here, I call it at the back end, it's like we're in the same room, we're not, we're all separate, but is Diana Tyndall, who is our new volunteer coordinator, and she's going to be helping with some of the logistics of the meeting that we'll get into. So just in terms of the agenda, I want to give you a bit of context for why this came about and what we're doing, where it came from, and the purpose and goals. I want to talk through the key findings. It's very high level. There's obviously plenty more detailed data that we've got, but we're just presenting a top line, and you can take questions and provide more detail if anyone has questions. Then we want to talk about what we're doing next, where we're thinking that we should go as a club, and that's where we obviously really want your feedback. And then we should have time for the meeting scheduled for 7 to 8:30, and we're hoping to have time for a good discussion towards the end. Well, not towards the end, sort of around 7 o'clock, something like that. Sorry, not 7 o'clock, that would be 8 o'clock. So a bit of housekeeping. Now, those of you who know me, which I think I saw just about everybody on the call, have a daughter named Molly, who is 17. And so I put in the first picture of the housekeeper. And if you were born in 1970 or before, you know who the person is on the left. You may not know who the person is on the right, and she made me put that person in. They're both housekeepers, and you can look them up after if you don't know who they are. So a couple of things. We do plan to record this presentation and discussion. And that's really, we'll be posting it on our website for anyone who missed it, but also just for future as well, if people come in and want to know a little bit more about who we are. So we're intending to be entirely transparent about our club and what our findings are, the findings are of our organizational review. So we will be recording. General etiquette, I think probably everybody's doing this anyway, and most used to Zoom. Just mute yourself when you're not talking, if you don't mind. We'd like to see you on video, but it's just so we kind of, it's easier to kind of have a connection through Zoom when you can't do face-to-face. If you don't feel like turning on your video, that's totally fine. But, if you feel comfortable, then that's good. We'll be making use of the chat a lot tonight. That's because we have the basic version of Zoom, being a good, responsible, not-for-profit organization, which doesn't have some of the functionality. So we're going to be using it a lot today. And in order to make sure that we're able to actually get through the presentation and the findings and the where to from here, what I'd like to suggest is that you use the chat function as we go, use it as a stream of consciousness, to ask questions, to comment on what resonates, what you think, well, that doesn't sound right, anything that comes to mind at all. If you are happy with, it contributes to the conversation if you use everyone. If you have a question or a comment that you'd really rather not everybody sees, then just send it. Diana Tyndall is going to be monitoring the chat, so send it to Diana, and she'll monitor that. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to hold your questions till the end of the or fire questions into the chat. We'll address them at the end of the presentation. And what Diana is going to do is if they're, depending on how much there is in the chat, is to basically draw from that to ask questions and kind of I'll direct the conversation using what comes up in the chat. So that's kind of the plan. We also would like to record the chat in Zoom as well, partly so that we know what kinds of things were of interest to people, and also so if there's anything that's unaddressed that we run out of time for, then we can get back to people as well. So that's kind of the plan. We'll see how we go. So the first thing I'd like to do is just get you all to introduce yourselves. If this is your first time on Zoom, you'll find down the bottom, just scroll over the bottom screen, you'll see a chat button. It's the circle. And what I'd like you to do is just take a moment to introduce yourself on the chat, your full name, and which part or parts of the club you represent. In other words, the senior men's, senior women's, or juniors. I'll just give everybody a moment to do that. Okay, Diana, how many have people still contributing, or we reached a point of saturation there?
Yeah, no, they're still continuing.
Okay.
We've got quite a few people introducing themselves. It's great.
Okay.
Lots of senior men's, senior women's, coaches, players, volunteers, administrators, managers.
Excellent. Okay, I think I shall carry on. Thank you, everybody. Good to see we have a really good representation from different parts of the club tonight. So in terms of like, where did this come from? The purpose of the organizational review really came about. So I joined the board in November last year, and then I became acting president in February, when our then president, Andrew Dewberry, was elected to the board of directors, or as president of the Field Hockey BC. That's interesting. Is anyone seeing these red squiggles on my presentation slide here?
Yep, I can see them.
That's bizarre. I've had a child in here. I don't understand. Never mind. Passing lightly over that. So we thought that it would be a good idea. We haven't actually, as far as I know, or as far as we know, we haven't actually done a systematic look at our organization. We've had strategic retreats before where we gather people together and we talk about, what's gone well, what's gone less well, and what do we want to do. But it's really kind of on a year-to-year basis. And we haven't tried to do it using the full range of data that's available to us to help make decisions. So we have we've always had lots of anecdotal evidence about what's working and what isn't as well. So this is really just a more systematic way of doing it, to basically to have better evidence to guide our decision making. And that's at strategic level and also operational, and the time frame was really the next 12 to 18 months. Of course, we're in COVID time, and that does change things, but we're the kind of level that we looked at are things that we are, even if we can't implement things right away because of COVID, we're hoping the direction still sits well with where we want to be. So really the guiding questions were, where do we want to go? What's working well and why? What's working less well and why? And then what specific outcomes do we want to see? And where should we focus our attention to achieve those outcomes? And then ultimately, what should we keep doing? What should we stop doing? And what should we start doing? So in case you're curious, the kinds of things that we did interviews with a whole wide range of people. So interview internal people with the Hawks Club, external people that we have to deal with, like external stakeholders, including former staff and former board members, people from the leagues. We looked at a whole bunch of administrative data that we have, like our registration system, and found lots of data in strange places that we needed to bring together, and that pointed us in direction of how we could manage our data better as well. So some administrative data. We did some targeted surveys. So we did a coaching survey, we did a non-returning players survey. We were initially planning to do a broader survey of our membership, but for various reasons we decided not to do that. And so again, this is kind of our first opportunity to really ask more broadly of our membership, for some input. So Yeah, so we won't say it was entirely comprehensive, but it was systematic. I think the first thing to say is a bit of a spoiler alert is that what we found through the reviews, we don't need a big change of direction. And I don't know about you, I find that reassuring. I hope you find it reassuring as well, that we're already doing, okay, those marks are now on every single slide. How fascinating. Okay, so it's maybe not all that surprising in that we have had these strategic retreats in the past, and many of the themes that came out through this organizational review have been talked about before. But there are definitely some things that we need to pay more attention to. And I think that through this process, we've been able to identify more specifically some of the gaps that we need to address. Okay, so we basically have the findings we're going to present are kind of bucketed in 6 areas. So we have players, coaches, umpires, the Hawks community, the environment in which we play and coach and umpire, and our capacity. So on the player, let's start with the player front, because after all, that is the reason for the primary reason for our existence. And we've, since 2016, I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, but we have actually massively expanded the range of programming that we have. So there's let me see, I think there's 10 different new programs that we have introduced over the last 4 years. Some of them are things that we used to do in the past and we've restarted. But we also have some things that are brand new, and they span across the different kind of target groups that we have. So obviously a lot of junior stuff, but we also have both men's and women's high performance and recreational programming that's new. And in particular, I think one of the things that we should highlight just this past summer as being something that I think we should be proud of is that there was the return to play became an option. And it was a pretty intimidating and daunting task to figure out how we would do that and do it safely. And so with a huge amount of effort from Alex and from the board, we managed to put together the first return to play plan that we'd seen for field hockey. We offered it everywhere, and some organizations, then used ours as the basis for theirs. And just the fact that we were able to get those programs off the ground during the summer, for men's and women's skills program, and also for the summer programs, something I think we should be probably proud of as a club. On the not so positive side, and I think this maybe surprised us, Alex has been talking about this at every AGM for the last 3 years, as he gives a presentation about how our numbers are doing. But I think it wasn't until we saw these really side by side and looked at the data that we could just see how sharp the decline has been in our membership numbers. So despite all that programming, we have really been losing members, and it's if you look at that chart, it's the decline is on our junior side. So a 44% decline in the juniors since 2016. So the under 7 age group is the worst affected, but the U8 to 12 is also badly affected. So what that tells us is that by the time we get to teenagers, if they've been playing in the system for a while, we do a pretty good job of retaining them. So it's really recruitment, getting them into the system in the first place, where we've really struggled, and particularly for the boys and men's side, the numbers are pretty thin all the way through the system now on the men's side. So yeah, I think I'll stop with that. On the player side, there's plenty of data to support this. This is just kind of like the highest level that we have. We also had some other data that told us that, that reinforced that our issue is more on recruiting new players than retaining the ones that we have, and that was throughout the club. So we do have some concerns about the senior women players' engagement. That was one of the focus areas that we went into the organizational review with, because we had heard anecdotally that might be an issue. And what we saw is that it's not reflected in the numbers yet. In the sense that the registrations on our women's side, senior women, so I'm not talking about junior girls playing in senior women's, I'm talking about senior women. Those numbers have been pretty stable over 4 years, but their concerns are more around things like that. sorry, just lost my place there. There are more things that we might need to do to make sure that our senior women players are happy and wanting to continue to be engaged as players and in other roles in the club as well, and just coming to events and things like that. One of the things that we also found is that we have this huge range of programming, so especially on the junior side. So it doesn't seem very likely that we are not offering enough for people or enough different options. And we also noticed that we really have not done marketing at all. So in some ways that's good because it's a clear opportunity for us to do something actionable about that, is to deal with, because we really haven't done any systematic marketing at all. For junior player recruitment. So there might be some opportunities for niche programming to fill some gaps, but it's probably not as critical as marketing what we already offer. On the coaching side, we have a pretty robust pool. I mean, if you think about, we have, sorry, I'll go back to this last slide in case you're wondering. It's about, we have now just under 800 members. So for a club of 800 members, we have 114 coaches in the system, which is sounds pretty good. And it is robust. We have a good mix of adults and juniors in coaching. We have a good mix of males and females doing coaching. We have a pretty robust pool of juniors coaching young kids. And we definitely have a pool of talented and very committed senior coaches. What we're not seeing, our gap, is getting enough coaches who are prepared to commit, who are interested and have not some, I don't know if it's the qualifications necessarily, but the interest to carry on from wherever they start coaching and coach in a senior league team. So either, I don't know on the men's side necessarily, it doesn't seem to be as much as a problem, but certainly on the women's side, we have struggled every year to make sure we have enough coaches on the women's side. And we have had conversations at the board level about, well, is it a good idea to keep growing, the number of senior women's teams that we enter in the league if we don't have enough coaches? So we really need to do something about that pipeline for getting more people to coach at the senior level. So that could be either bringing more of our senior players and developing them and interesting them in coaching, or it could be getting some of our parent coaches some of whom have lots of experience playing and coaching field hockey, but doing more coaching. Or it could be graduating some of our junior coaches who've been coaching juniors for a number of years and maybe putting them in the senior league with a partner or a mentor to coach an entry level team. So we have some underused talent, we think, that we could use. Oh, sorry, one more thing I wanted to mention on the coaching side. The other thing we do know is that there's certainly some, I won't say concerns, but we definitely have some inconsistent quality among our coaches, and that's primarily with the parent coaches and with the junior coaches. Different kinds of problems. The junior coaches, they know about field hockey, but they don't necessarily know how to manage a group of 12-year-olds. And the parent coaches might do it because nobody else stepped up to do it, and they used to coach soccer, but they don't know anything about field hockey. So that's, and it is something, when we did our survey of the non-returning players, we didn't find a lot of themes in there that would help guide us as to why our numbers have declined so drastically. The only theme that was possibly in there was that some people mentioned was inconsistent coaching. So that's certainly something that we could address. On the umpiring front, this is the third pillar. Again, it looks like we have a really good foundation. We have 50 active umpires. So that's umpires who've coached a game in the last 2 years. And so it looks healthy, but again, we dig a little deeper and find that we have some weaknesses in there. So nearly half of our umpires are unrated juniors. So that's great, we're terrific that we're getting so many juniors interested in umpiring, and we need them certainly to umpire in the junior leagues in the fall and in the spring. But they're unrated and they don't necessarily make the transition to, in fact, they rarely at this point make the transition into becoming kind of long-term umpires and coaching in the senior leagues. The junior program that we have for mentoring umpires is supported by a tiny core of dedicated older mentors. Patrick Oswald is one of the people who has just done a ton, every year after year after year of mentoring young umpires. He's not the only one, but he has done a ton of it. And we've come to rely on Patrick, who may eventually at some point decide that he wants to do something else. So we need to find more people to do this. We also have, in the Women's League, for example, we had three Hawks umpires who were umpiring Women's League games. That's over 160 games a season. So this person down here you can see in the corner is Carrie Cornwall. I don't know if Carrie's on the call tonight, but she has umpired every weekend in the Women's League. And basically, if we didn't have Carrie, we would be in an awful lot of trouble. And what's happened, especially recently, is the COVID-19 with the new system for the cohorts, is that we had already identified it as a risk back in the spring when we were doing the early preparation of the organizational review, and then it blew up. And I'm sure any of you who've been involved in the conversation with the senior side would know that we're really, really struggling for umpires, and that the league is at risk because of umpires. And so we're not alone in that, but we are a big club, and there are certainly expectations that we are going to supply and keep supplying umpires. So that's something we really need to do. I think potentially it could actually, again, limit the growth potential of how many teams we can put into the Senior Women's League, because for every team we have to nominate an umpire who's going to do who's qualified at the right level and going to umpire a corresponding number of games. So we really need to pay attention to this. And in fact, it's something we've already started to work on. Another area we looked at was the Hawks community. And this came out really early when we were doing the investigations, that we have 125-year history. I don't know whether all of you know that. That's we started, I asked Alex for a list of the programs that we had started since 2016, and he sent me a list of all the programs and the year that they started. And there was, 2016, 2017, 2004, 1895. And that kind of stood out, right? That we've been a presence in the field hockey community since 1895. And there's a lot of pride in the club over that, and a lot of history, and a lot of strength in that. We have people who have been Hawks for life, particularly on the men's side. It's something that we, again, can be very proud of. We have a huge number of volunteers who have made this club go. It's an area of a constant challenge for us, but even though we're always thinking, where can we get more from? And there's certainly more on that tonight. We do have a lot of people who have volunteered to make this club go and be possible. And the last thing on the men's side especially is that we do have strong engagement and cohesiveness on the men's side. On the women's side, it's less cohesive, so very much team-based community culture. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think on the women's side, there's this persistent tension between trying to meet the needs of the junior players coming up and trying to meet the needs of the senior women players. And it's a balance every year, and it's really hard to get it right. But if you're in a club, we're the only club in Vancouver that has a huge number of juniors. And so I think there's a sense sometimes from what we've heard that the senior women feel like it's all about the juniors, and that they are sort of, we don't pay as much attention or thank them for the contributions that they're making. So on the women's side, it seems to be kind of more team-based. The men's and women's junior programs are very siloed in our club. So we have very frequent all club events. And so what that means is we have men's games, then women's games, then junior games. And administratively, Alex knows everything that goes on in the club, but people tend to be aligned with, primarily, well, I shouldn't say that. There are some people who know, probably most of the people on this call, who know all parts of that. But if you're an individual member, an ordinary member of a club, you might not have any idea that the club has all of these different dimensions. And so we operate in quite siloed ways. The positive thing we do think is that when we do bring people together, and we have tried to do that through things like club days. When we were planning our 125-year anniversary, we have an annual event as well. It hasn't happened every year. We do try that, and whenever we do have those events, we do have an incredible spirit of community when we bring people together, but we don't have a infrastructure for making sure that happens every year, and consequently, it's the all club events are quite infrequent. So there's a lot of work that we could do to build on this amazing foundation that we have. Another area we thought was important to look at is our environment, and this has kind of grown on us. Again, people who've been working in this area for a long time would know this, and Alex especially, because he's the administrator dealing with all of the operational battles that we have. We're really challenged by operating in a system that is just super fragmented. So we have separate league administration for the men's league, the senior men's, the senior women's, and the juniors. There's not necessarily I won't say any, but much negotiation. The senior women's league is for seniors, and there's not always it's not always easy to meet the needs of a club that has juniors as well that they need to accommodate. And then there's that forces competition as well all the way through. Actually, I'll come back to that in a sec. The other thing we've found consistently is that we don't, at this point, have a lot of institutional support from outside for the growth of field hockey and for the role of the clubs in the system. So we have Field Hockey Canada, FHBC, at this point are fairly focused on high performance. They may have Field Hockey BC, especially, there's a mandate in there for development, but it's not necessarily operationalized through board positions that are dedicated to growth, or to administrative positions that do that either. So we're in some ways, and I'm I guess going out on a limb a bit in saying this, like we're a little bit on our own in trying to we're trying to work with all these different partners, but not necessarily getting as much support for. And again, not just us, but the clubs in general and the club system, and what we are all trying to collectively do to grow the base at the bottom. Another really important thing is that our facilities are vulnerable. So we are lucky we have Eric Hamber, but we don't control that. It's shared between Parks Board and School Board. It's a field hockey purpose pitch, but just the way the system is set up, we don't even get to necessarily have field hockey. Regardless of us, field hockey doesn't necessarily get first dibs on that. So, you can arrive at prime time on an evening and find a soccer group there. So if something happens to Hamburg, we don't have anything. We have UBC and another pitch, Crofton, that is women only or girls only, and both are far more expensive than the public facilities. So incredibly vulnerable and limiting for our potential growth as well. The last thing I would say is that there are some broader trends around professionalization of amateur sport, the decline of multi-sport. We suspect, but we don't know, that may be a part of the reason why we've had a decline in our junior numbers, because there's been an expansion of the soccer season for spring now, and for an expectation that you are going to focus on one sport from an early age, even though all the evidence says that's a bad idea. Operationally, that's not what we do. It's what Hawks tries to do, but not every sport does that. So decline in multi-sport, but also the expectation that that professionals, rather than volunteering and making a club happen, that we have paid administrators, they're going to do all the work. And again, this is not specific to the Hawks Club, but something that generally we think is going on that is affecting our environment. The last kind of area that I want to talk about is capacity. And this is where we have lots and lots of talent, but we have a lot of gaps and too much to do. And some of the evidence we have for that it's about our staff capacity, it's about our volunteer capacity, both in terms of the time and the skill set that we have that we need. So as an example, the club treasurer role has been vacant for 2 years. So Andrew kindly continued to do the role while he was also being president of the Vancouver Hawks Field Hockey Club. But that wasn't necessarily by choice. It was because we didn't have someone to step into the club treasurer role. So clearly that's a role that needs to be filled. You can see down there on the left, we have the Constitution that was originally done in 1988. It references things like telegrams and telexes or cables. That's kind of the most egregious one. But there's a whole lot of places in there that we really need to update our Constitution to reflect reality and the way we want our club to run. It's the kind of work that, somebody's really got to love it to do it. And and have the time and the brain space to do it. So it's been on the boil, something we should do for, I can't remember the first time we saw it appear in the minute, so we should do this. But it's been on the boil for a long time. If you look down the bottom, that circle, ignore the squiggles that seem to be on every slide. You can see the field house at Hamber there. And the reason that's in the photo is because we have said for ages we need somebody in the club, really advocating for us with the Parks Board. There's a structure in place. I'm not sure if it's for advocacy. Not sure it's super effective. A broader one, broader than just the Hawks Club. That field house took, I don't know, 3 years or something to build. And we need to be able to, those are the kinds of things that are incredibly frustrating to not have any control over. And so we would like to be able to have structures in place to actually be able to influence those kinds of decisions to move along. And the final one is we have a lot of strategic things, ideas that have come up in our strategic planning retreats over the last few years, lots of actions, documents, plenty of places where we've said, let's set up, this, that, or the other, and we just haven't had a chance to do it. So we do many, many things well, but I would say overall, we fall chronically short when it gets to implementation because we don't have the board and staff structure to support it. So I'm going to go on to part 2 now, which is what to do about this. So these are our kind of, I won't say our preliminary ideas because we've had a lot of thought and a lot of conversation about them, but we would very much welcome your feedback on what we do about some of these issues that we've identified. So firstly, we did say we wanted to, revisit, well, what is our purpose and meaning in life as a club? And so this is the vision that we've come up with, which is a field hockey community for life. And really it's about strengthening the idea of Hawks as a community within a broader field hockey community. And that broader field hockey community is not just the Lower Mainland and Vancouver, but field hockey as a sport. So we are thinking about field hockey, and we have the foundations to be able to realize this vision. But that because of who we are and the breadth of programs, I think we have somebody in our club. I don't know who our youngest current player is, but our current oldest player, I believe, is 81 or 82 this year, currently playing. And so we can hold our hands on our hearts and say we can actually be a community for life, and not just of people who are still affiliated with the club through, we have lots of people who are affiliated in non-playing ways, but you can play this sport for your whole life. And that is something that's quite unique. So we are supporting the development of a one field hockey community within our club, one field hockey community for BC, and we want building community to be infused in everything we do. So our mission, and I apologize that this is a very boring slide. I think maybe just those little red marks on the right were just to, I don't know, spice it up a little. So what do we do? Our mission is developing and maintaining lifelong involvement in field hockey. So we do that by, we provide programming for all ages, all levels, all through the year. And you can see that just since 2016, the ways in which we've already expanded, and we would like to continue with that. But not only programming, we also provide development opportunities for players, for coaches and umpires, so that you can see we can keep people. It's not just you play in the league, once you become an adult, that's all there is for you if you're not high performance. We want to make sure that we provide development opportunities for everybody, no matter where they are in their field hockey journey. How we're going to do it, we want to do this firstly by doing the basics well. So those 4 things are the things that we've identified so far as the basics. And we know, I'm going to be very upfront and say, this will be no surprise, like this is still aspirational. We fall down all the time in places on doing the basics, and we are so conscious of it. This is our aspiration. This is what we want to hold ourselves accountable for. But we've told, again, this came from lots of interviews, and also the survey with the non-returning players is something that people actually, that wasn't a reason why people left. They said that we found it very organized and we enjoy that. So we need to keep that up, but it's something that people value. So we're going to do the basics well. And a piece that's not in our current constitution, but we want to include, is this whole piece of engaging with other stakeholders in the Lower Mainland and BC to grow and maintain an effective field hockey system, because we can't be successful as a club unless the environment is successful. And so we need to have a part in making that happen. So our strategic priorities that we're thinking of, you can see that we're going to address all of these buckets. So just firstly to say, this is not all we are going to do, but if we have to focus on the areas that we most need to improve, these are the areas that we've identified. So for players, I think the second slide I showed about the decline in numbers is, and being able to identify where that decline is happening is really like, that just tells us exactly where we need to focus our attention for players, and that's on recruiting young juniors in the under 7 to under 12 in particular. Again, it's not to say we won't be looking at recruitment, development, retention for other player groups, but that's where we want to focus. For coaches, we know that we need to grow the pool of coaches who are qualified and interested in senior league coaching. So we're looking at creating a more robust pipeline for that to happen, and also to address the inconsistencies in our coaching quality. And that work is already underway as well through the leadership of 2 of our current board members. For umpires, again, of course, we want to grow the pool generally, but the area that needs the most attention is finding umpires and pushing them through that pipeline to be qualified and interested in umpiring in the senior leagues, and particularly in the women's side, because we have men. We haven't heard it being a problem on the men's side, but we have way more women's teams and way more rules about what we have to do and the requirements that we have to meet. I shouldn't say that so baldly. It feels that way. There are definitely some strict requirements that we have to meet, and so we need to make that a priority. On the club community front, I suppose this is a more general. It is very general statement. We need to build the Hawks club community, and we're aware that this will be challenging in a COVID year, depending on how long it lasts. But there are some pieces within that we particularly need to pay attention to, and that is creating those all club inter-club events, and also trying to find ways to make sure that we are paying attention to the needs of our senior women as being part of this community. So just really being mindful of that. On the environment front, again, it's a fairly open-ended statement about strengthening advocacy. I think we would see 2 key areas. One is advocacy around facilities to address that really key vulnerability we have about our turf and access to turf, field hockey specific turf, that is, and also continuing to advocate for a more effective, streamlined system, so that we're not all the leagues are not competing, and the administrative structures are not all competing against each other for coaches, for players, for umpires. And again, that work has already started, but we need to keep going with that. And finally, on the capacity front, I would say of everything that's in this list, number 7 is probably the most important one, because we can't do any of the other ones, no matter how important they are. We can't do them unless we increase our staff and volunteer capacity. So we have some thoughts about how we do that, but that's really critical. Number 8 is we do have some gaps and weaknesses in our governance. So it's not just the fact that our constitution is extremely out of date. We also are missing some really important processes. There's especially around our finances. So we have a bookkeeper, we have a treasurer. We're not in danger, but we have some things that we could definitely improve around our decision making. So those are probably the two big areas that we need to attack under that broad umbrella of governance. And then the last one is just expanding our revenue sources beyond our membership. I didn't really touch on that in terms of being a finding, but we want to make sure that we have ways of, especially if we were ever to build up some kind of fund to support the facilities development, we need to find some other ways to support our revenue. And partly it's so that we can continue to offer programs that may not actually make any money, but are really critical for getting people into the sport. So for example, we have a schools program now, again, it's probably not running this year, but we've run it. It's not, we offer it for free to the schools. We have to pay for that, and we feel like we need to keep doing that, but we've got to find ways of paying for it without forcing a fee increase on the other members of our club. So that's the rationale for that one. So we think we also need to do something about our structure to support effective implementation. Again, I said this is the most critical thing I think we have to do. So with the board, what we want to do firstly is expand it. We want to change. So at the moment, what happens is if you're elected to the board, the entire board turns over year on year, is re-elected. But what that's actually meant in practice is people feel like they have to stay in the role until somebody else relieves them of it. And so it also looks like, because we have a number of people on the board now who are, we haven't had particularly defined portfolios. We can have people doing, making very important contributions to the board discussions, but not with a particular responsibility for a particular area. So what that means is we don't necessarily have anybody to drive the important work or the work that we've identified as priorities. So what we want to do, and it may work, it may not, we're going to try it, is we have defined, we're suggesting that we define the portfolios for our members at large, and we're asking for a 1-year commitment from people as they go into those. With the view that we can potentially redefine what our needs are for the members at large roles on a year-to-year basis. So they're not like permanent. We don't permanently need necessarily I'm going to pick one out of the year. We don't permanently need a marketing director, for example, but we sure as heck need one now. So we've got a job description for a marketing director, and then in a year's time, it'd be nice to fill it. And then in a year's time, we would evaluate, do we still need that role? Maybe we need something else. But what we are only asking when people come on board, we're only asking for 1-year commitment. So we're not asking them to, it's like, we're hoping that maybe with that, people don't feel it's quite so daunting to take on a role at a board level. We also want to introduce a committee and working group structure. So this isn't the first time that we've put this forward, or that the board has put this forward. We've got a particular idea for the way the kinds of committees and the structure for those committees, but it's a way of spreading the load. I'll come back to that in a sec. We also have a volunteer coordinator. And so we've had a volunteer coordinator in the past, but it's been a very operational role of a very, very important, don't let me underestimate that, responsible for making sure that we have volunteers in key positions. But I think the way we want this role to evolve is that person is going to be helping that person, i.e. Diana, thank you, Diana, for being willing to take this on, is that person is going to help us to identify, just by looking at the numbers and where people are volunteering in the system, to help us have a way of knowing who the people are that by their record of having volunteered for things in certain areas, we might be able to approach to do an expanded role or a different role because they have obviously been engaged in some way in the club. So it's not that Diana is going to identify who are the talented coaches in our system, but she will help us to know, okay, well, this person actually has coached 4 teams for 3 years and might be a person we could potentially groom. So she would put that name forward to the coaching group as an area to coach, and same for umpires as well. And I think probably even more critically for umpires. We have made some changes already over the past 4 years to try and encourage more people to volunteer. So we have a volunteer bond. And from all the reports, that's been quite effective. We've made some money out of it, which wasn't the intention, but it also has meant that we've been able to find a way of getting people started in volunteer roles, and that's been really, really well done. We have volunteer stipends as well. They're not massive stipends, and we're not pretending to ourselves that the stipends are the reason that that people do these jobs, but there are jobs that are really, really important to the functioning of the club, like the equipment coordinator, the uniform coordinator, the umpiring coordinators. Those are jobs without which we can't function as a club. It's way too big for our administrative staff to do that on top of everything else they're doing. So we have the volunteer stipends, and we are looking at finding ways to make those more equitable And we may decide that there are some other roles we should offer stipends to as well, just as a way of at least acknowledging the level of work that people are doing. And our final one that we're talking about is increasing our staffing as well, and in particular to address some gaps that we have, things that we know are going to be challenging to address if we simply are going to continue to rely on volunteers. So I just want to speak a little bit to the board, and based on the findings from the organizational review, the five roles that are highlighted in yellow are roles that are new roles, and they are newly defined roles, and they are open. And we have player development and coaching development. They weren't previously defined. They are now, and we have people who have agreed to take on those roles, for which we are extremely grateful. And we hope that come AGM in November, they haven't got cold feet and decide not to run again. But last I heard, they were keen. The most urgent role we have is obviously that of treasurer. As I said before, that role has been vacant for 2 years, and it is very limiting for us in terms of forward planning, in terms of budgeting. So we're able to do the basics, which is great. Andrew's been terrific at continuing to do the basics of the job, but there are other things that we need that role to do. And in particular, if we're going to move, as you'll see on the next slide, towards some different arrangements with our staffing, we're going to need a treasurer to be able to help us with figuring out the implications, financial implications of some of those moves. So super, super important. So if anybody knows anybody or can draw in any favors, I'm sure lots of the people on the call here are people who are already doing lots, but people owe you stuff. So this is to spread the word as well. So what we want to be doing through our structure is to spread the load, and really what we want to try and do is make it less scary, particularly if for the board members, by having people to support you. So we have the standing committees, so that's the committees that have a very defined terms of reference. They meet on a regular basis in advance for and we only have one, and that's the finance committee. We have one plan. We've talked about having a finance committee, but we haven't set it up. And again, that will be super important as we go forward to making some of these changes. The ad hoc committees are the ones that we run. So as an example, it maybe didn't have this name, but the meetings that Sarah Spencer convenes for the captains, managers, and coaches of the senior women's teams, whenever we have at a key point in the year. So we have a meeting at the end of the year to review what went well, what went not so well, and what we want to do for the next year. It's meetings like that. So they're not, they're at the call of the chair. They don't have necessarily a regular schedule, but they're things that we need to do as a group, because one person cannot be making those kinds of decisions when they affect so many stakeholders. So we have one that basically works on the women's side. The men's side also meets kind of on an ad hoc basis. We don't currently have one for the junior leagues, but we should. And we don't currently have one around the club community as well, which we also should. The working groups are like the member at large roles in that we picture these being, we have them for as long as they're needed, and then we disband them and we form others as needed. So for example, I certainly hope that we are not going to need a governance working group forever. But I've been in the role for 6 months. I know the consultation needs doing. I'm willing to put my hand up to help it get done, but I really would love some help with that. So, but I hope that once we've done that big piece of work and some other pieces, we may not need that governance working group anymore. It's just a way of spreading the load. Coaching on the junior recruitment and coaching development, those are two areas that we've identified where the people, we don't want Steph and Matt feeling like they have to do all this work on their own and with Alex and Casey. So we need people for that working group, those working groups as well. Umpiring development is absolutely urgent and critical. It's so urgent that we have not waited for an umpiring director to be in the role. I've asked Alex just to take it on and lead that for now, which he's doing he's already done a bunch of work on it, but it really should not be our club manager doing this. That should be a board member leading that work. And finally, marketing and communications. As I said before, we basically don't do any. And it's such an opportunity begging for us if we have some people with the passion and the qualifications to do it. It's not something that we have a lot of capacity internally. We don't have it on the board at the moment for someone to lead it. And it's not an area that, that Alex and Casey have a lot of experience in either. So we've had people, incredible people being willing to do bits and pieces of the work over the years. But they felt unsupported basically, and so it's, you know, there's a matter of burning out. So we need people to help us with this function. Now I can't see that. Yes, I can. I'll move you all over to the other side. On the staff side, what we are thinking of doing is moving the club manager role into being more of an executive director. The reason for that is because there's a whole lot, as we talked about professionalization of the sport, we also talked about the need to be making those connections and doing work that is not just about the day-to-day operations of the club, but doing some of those larger work around the system so that the system can be successful, so that we can be successful. So Alex is already, despite his job description being developed in 2016, didn't have any of this stuff in it. He's actually already doing this work, or not all of it, but he's already doing a lot of it. And so we want to transition to that being what the role is. It's an executive director role. To complement that, obviously, if executive director role is doing that and not doing some of the more operational stuff, then we need people to do that more operational stuff. So we have a club administrator at the moment. That's Casey, who's doing a lot of that work. We're going to have to figure out how else to support the administrative pieces of the role that an executive director would no longer be able to do. One of the ways of doing that is to have a technical director. So this is something we'd like to see. Again, we don't have, in a COVID year with uncertain revenue sources, we can't do it right now, but the technical director role would be responsible for taking the junior recruitment, development, retention, coach recruitment, development, retention, umpire recruitment, development, and retention, those three pieces, and having a staff person supported by a board, of course, but having a staff person who's really taking responsibility for those things. So as you can see, and again, so Matt Sarmento is already, he's doing pieces of that work already through the coaching. Barney's doing pieces of that work through the players. Alex and Carrie are already doing pieces of that through the umpiring, but it would make sense to have that be one person's job. We just need to figure out how to finance it, basically. And the last piece that we think is really, really important is that we actually have a staff person who's responsible for marketing communications. So that person isn't going to be the person who's determining what we do at a strategic level, but they would be guided by hopefully a director of marketing, or at the very least a marketing communications group, so that we can actually start to build some capacity in that area. So it would be supporting all of the other functions. So it would be supporting our junior recruitment. It would be supporting coach recruitment. It would be supporting umpire recruitment, and it would be supporting the development of that strong club community. The last piece on this slide is the volunteer pool. When Diana was very kind and said, what sort of help would you like? I thought about all of the different things that I knew that she could help with. And she's done volunteer coordination before. This actually is a super, super important role to be able to make the most of the volunteers that we have, and to build that pool. So that is going to be really fundamental to our ability to continue to implement what we want to implement. Last slide. So there are many, many opportunities to spread the word. And again, I'm very aware that the people who I have on the call today, by my count, we have 34 people, of whom, so probably 30 are people who are not board members and not club managers. I'm very aware that probably most of the people on the call are people who are already doing a lot of the work, and for which we're incredibly grateful. And if you are already doing a lot of the work, if you are one of the people who's doing a ton of umpiring or a ton of coaching or whatever, we don't want you to stop doing what you're doing, because that's really, really obviously critical. But we would like to start spreading the word about these opportunities. So Diana's created a sign up, I don't know if it's called an account or a sign up system. She has used it successfully when we were recruiting last year for the 125th anniversary event, which didn't unfortunately happen. And so we're planning to use that again. But basically what we're looking for is for everyone who's on the call tonight to think about if there's any way in which you would like to, you know, make a contribution, but more to the point, just be spreading the word about the kinds of opportunities that we have and that we're looking for. So I'm going to stop there and open up for questions and comments. Diana, has anything been coming in on the chat while I've been talking?
There was a question about whether coaches are paid.
Yeah.
And Alex has partially answered it, that there's a mix of paid and volunteer coaches. And I'm just putting the link to the sign up in the chat box as well. But if anybody has some comments or questions, they can put them in the chat. That would be great.
If you want, I can address that while people are thinking of things to ask or
Sure.
formulating their thoughts, if that's okay, Penny.
Absolutely, yeah. Carry on.
Yeah, so with our coaches, we have a range of, it depends on the program. So for senior activities, we pay a stipend, which is actually the most generous stipend among the league, but is also a stipend, not what you would consider a salary, but it's pretty reasonable. So that's for the senior coaches coaching senior teams on the men's and women's side. For juniors, we pay in the fall. We pay our coaches, and for like some of our special events and things like the summer camps, we pay all our staff, our coaches there. The Spring League has always traditionally been volunteer led, so we have some lead coaches who are paid, but we have at our maximum like 80 to 100 volunteer coaches out in the spring. It's pretty amazing, and it's a huge giving within our community. The Spring League, the Junior Spring League, it's a very unique thing in its atmosphere and in its goal, and it's basically all community and volunteer led. So that's the sort of bigger picture with the coaching. Within that, there's a lot of nuance and development, and it very much depends on the program. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Alex. Does anyone, I have a question for the group, if nothing else has come in. Diana, is there anything on the chat?
Nope, nothing else has come in.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So I would like to ask the group if there was anything that they found surprising in the findings. That's the first question. Is there anything that particularly resonates, or is there anything that kind of doesn't feel right? I'll give you a few minutes to have a think about that. Doug, I can see you've got a raised hand. I didn't know we had that function. So if you want to use the raised hand, that's fine too. Go ahead, Doug.
First, Penny and the board and Alex, thank you for that. That was hugely impressive and really interesting to see. And I guess it helps that we've got a professional evaluator turning her lens on the Hogs Club. So,
you, Doug. Diana's an evaluator as well. We're infiltrating.
It's a really useful reminder of how much the club is doing, of how much the club is doing right, of how many different people, age groups, genders, hockey abilities the club is connecting with. So anyway, thanks for that overview, and an overview based on some data that I know you guys have been digging. Just a few random thoughts. I mean, nothing was really surprising. I think what there is confirmation of a lot of things that we've thought were the case for quite a long time, and it's just really helpful now to have them stated so clearly. I like what you've proposed, or what the board has proposed with the staff. I think that makes a lot of sense. To me, I think the operation of the club is complicated enough and requires these paid positions to make it work. So that organization made sense for me. With the board, and one idea was, I saw you had the president and the treasurer on 2-year terms. I'm wondering about 2-year terms for board members that are staggered, to keep some continuity with the board, so that everybody isn't up for re-election every year. And I'm not sure if that's possible. And one more other thought I had. I really like the way the club is both supporting and folding in national team players on the men's and women's side. And they're more involved this year than ever, particularly on the women's side, because the women are back in the country. But they're playing, they're coaching, they're contributing to the club in all sorts of ways. The coaching is good for our juniors. It's also an excellent way in which the club can support our national team players. So I really like the way that that's working. And that leads me to my last thought, which is this idea of growing community, and how do we begin to do that, in particularly in the COVID year where it's really hard to come together. Well, one place where it is possible to come together, at least in limited numbers and with social distancing, is at the hockey pitch. And we are a community that's based around hockey. And so anything that we can do to encourage club members to come out and watch each other play, and maybe particularly our premier teams on the men's and women's side. And I know the men's side isn't really existing this year, but I would love it if the men's and the women's league were coordinated enough so that we could have our men's and women's premier teams playing back to back, and that this was known to the club and people could come and watch on a sunny September afternoon on a Saturday at Hamber or at UBC, playing a doubleheader, men's and women's, against West Van or India Club or whomever it was. But that requires the coordination outside of our community. It involves the larger hockey ecosystem, and that's been a tough nut to crack. But anyway, some random thoughts, but thank you again. That was hugely impressive.
Thanks, Doug. I have one response, but actually what I'd like to do is to ask the group if there's anyone who wants to comment on what Doug said, whether that resonates or if there are other areas that struck you.
We also have a few questions now in the chat box. I'm
okay.
Wondering if.
Okay. Well, in that case, let me just address Doug's one question. Well, two things. One was about the idea of the staggered board roles. Staggered 2-year roles. So we did look at, there's actually a board role in there that we're thinking of removing, which is the vice president, because we can't actually figure out what its function is, and we haven't had one for years. So we're removing that. So the question of, we could make the secretary potentially a 2-year role as well. I'm not sure whether Mike has joined the call or not. To your point about continuity, Doug, because I think we're just in a weird place right now where I haven't actually been elected, and we're hoping to have a treasurer. So I'm not sure if we can do that or not. Maybe in this first year, one of the roles is only a 1-year role for now, and then we stagger them starting from next year. So we had the same thought. We just have to figure out how we do that. The second one is, I love your idea of it's similar to the club day events that we've had, but they have been, I'm not sure the extent to which the men's and women's leagues have worked together in order for us to be able to offer those club days. But I don't know that we've made any effort, for example, to be thoughtful about having the men's prems and men's women's playing back to back as an example. So I think we would like to do things like that. We definitely in a non-COVID year, absolutely. I think we just need to think about whether it's possible, for those kinds of events where it's difficult to control the spectators. And that's so far it seems to be, that's the bigger risk as opposed to for exposure as opposed to on the field. So, but I take the larger point, which is we would definitely like to be able to do things like that. So thank you. And thank you for your support as well, Doug. Diana?
So if there are concerns regarding senior women's engagement, what is planned to address this? And are current players going to be asked their thoughts rather than just non-returning players?
Okay, both great questions. So the first question, which is, are current players going to be asked their thoughts? So I'll tell you why we didn't do that in the first place. It was certainly planned. We were planning to do an all member survey earlier in the year, but there was so much communication going on about return to play back when we were collecting data, and then it was summer, and then there was all the return to play for league stuff going on, and we were just worried about just completely overwhelming everybody with requests for contribution. So what we have thought about, not necessarily asking in a survey kind of format, but or sorry, not necessarily in a kind of random survey, but what we're thinking about is embedding evaluation on a more ongoing basis. So every time a program ends, that we would be asking our players or our families for feedback on those programs. So for the next one, for example, the Senior Men's and the Senior Women's League, the next opportunity to do that might be at the end of for the women on the women's side, when the cohorts finish when the cohort finishes in December, to reflect on, okay, so what was your experience this term, and we can broaden it out to ask some specific questions in areas that we're concerned about. So that's kind of how we were thinking about doing it. On the women's engagement side, I think we are two ideas. One is, and again, it's a COVID year, so we have a few less options, but I think we're much more aware of this now. We started just last year, probably our first program that was a development program targeted at women recreational players, which was just a 6-week program of indoor. And I think we would be looking to expand or regularize programs like that are targeted at our women. Also working on the club community, there are some things that we think we could do better on the communication front as well, to try and engage, to make sure that the senior women's side are not invisible in terms of our profile. I don't know that in terms of the how on the women's engagement side, we've got much further than that, but we'd absolutely welcome any ideas that people have. Because again, we know it's not reflected in our numbers, but we know it's just kind of bubbling there under the surface, and we don't want it to. We want to support it rather than ignore it. I don't know, Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that you want to share, or was that you asking the question?
No, that wasn't me. And I don't think I'd add anything beyond that. I think it's tricky to get at the women who aren't particularly engaged in the broader club experience through surveys, because the survey response tends to be indicative of engagement, or at least that would be my prediction. So I think it's if people have insights or thoughts on it, we're here and we want to hear that. So even when we're not actively soliciting people's thoughts on what's happening, we're always wanting input on people's experiences, and I'm always happy to hear that.
I think the other thing to add, Sarah, is that we could, and we did talk about this early in the review and we didn't do it, was just having groups of, rather, if people don't want to fill in a survey, we might be able to do some kind of investigation of just small groups of people who are teammates, and they might be happy to talk in a small group about some of the things that we could do, and I would be happy to do that as well. Just again, trying not to overload people with gathering more information, but we'd be very happy to do that if people thought that was a good idea.
Penny, somebody suggested if you stop screen sharing, then people would be able to see more of other people's faces. And
that is a great idea. I'm only seeing myself in large. I hope I hope that's not what you guys are seeing.
You can change it to a gallery.
Yeah, got it.
In the area of marketing, what sort of specifics are felt to be most important?
Oh my God, where to start? So the part of the problem is that none of us are marketers. So we just know that there's a problem and we're not doing anything about it. So we have basically, we don't have any social media presence really to speak of, or no regular social media presence. So for example, if we were trying to target the parents of school age kids, there's social market. Oh, Barney's there too. Excellent. Thanks, Barney. I didn't see you before. There are opportunities to build some kind of presence, so for recruitment that way. Also for engaging people in the spirit of the community. We don't do any social media. I would say that's probably the first thing. The second thing is reaching out to, for example, we have a schools program, and one of the folks running, who's been very engaged in a schools program, has we don't have a system for making sure that anybody who participates in that program necessarily receives any information about the league or has any follow-up. So we need to have systems like that put in place so that we can make sure that when we make a contact with someone, there's a way to follow them up and get them to know more about what we actually do. Those are two really obvious ones. Yeah, those are two really obvious ones where it's more a matter of we have nothing. And so we are looking for help to firstly define what the strategy might look like. And then once we have some kind of strategy and some plans, then actually being able to have somebody on board to implement them. I don't know, Alex or Barney or any other board members, do you guys have any thoughts on that? You can see we need help in this area. So if you know anything about marketing, if you know any, especially those of you who are owed lots of favors because you already do a lot for the club, this is an area we would, if you know anybody who might be interested, it's an area as you can tell from the way we've talked about it, we need help in that area.
Could you elaborate?
Yeah,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Alex and I got excited at the same time. I was just gonna say, I think probably what you're emphasizing on the strategy versus the actual brand, like the Hawks have a brand, but it's the strategy of marketing that image and getting it connected to people so they recognize it and then follow up.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Barney. I don't know when you came on the call, Barney, but I'd like to take this opportunity. I introduced Mike and Sarah who were on the call. Stephanie Nesbitt is also a board member who's come on to do some work in the area of mostly to do with juniors and coaching. So welcome, Barney. I don't know if I missed anybody else. And Carolina Curdy, I see Carolina's on the call as well, who was a board member until very recently as well. Alex, you wanted to comment?
I mean, just very quickly to sort of reiterate that it needs a coordinated and structured approach to marketing where we put time and effort into it. So it's not realistic with our current capacity. And it is definitely something that we will benefit greatly from having a professional person who knows what they're doing it. We've had some fantastic volunteers, Carolina and a group of people doing some great stuff, but I think it's crucial that we have that focus to push us over the edge to where we're actually achieving things with our marketing, where we're actually getting some return from it, which we're not getting right now.
Great.
Hey, Diana.
I have a question here about turf vulnerability. Can you elaborate on what options are available to solve the turf vulnerability issue?
God.
E.g. renegotiated agreements, different turfs, fundraising to build a new turf exclusive for field hockey?
Those are great questions. We have not really systematically attacked it. There is a Vancouver, what's it called, Alex? The federation, that outdoor sports federation, or
Vancouver Field
Sports Federation, which is meant to be a body that works with the Parks Board on facilities. So it's multi-sport, and we have had Vancouver Hawks Club in fact, I think we still do have Hawks representatives on that group, but we haven't seen the reward from that yet.
Sorry, Penny, to interrupt.
Yeah, go
They're
ahead.
an advocacy group in a way. They actually are organized by the Parks Board. They have recommended in the last 2 cycles, they've recommended a field hockey turf as being a priority, but the Parks Board senior management has not accepted that recommendation and has put in further soccer turf. So it's a political level that we maybe need some form of advocacy and help.
Yeah, so I think if we ask about options, I'm not sure there are options, a lot of options actually on the table right now. I think what we are missing is somebody who can take that problem and the problem of we don't and figure out or help us to figure out a strategy for, well, what might we do to increase our chances of not being vulnerable on the facilities front. So that's the role that we're looking for. Go ahead,
Great.
Diana. Are there any other questions?
Yes, on juniors, how do we expand past Main Street? We're a West Side club.
Well, I'm so glad you asked. We did collect some data on that actually, which I thought was very interesting. And I don't, the idea of expanding beyond, I don't have it off the top of my head. Let me just go back to my presentation and see if it's in my spare slides somewhere here. Hold on. Nope, I didn't put it in, darn it. So I didn't put that in the spare slides. Sorry, are you still seeing me or are you seeing, yeah, there we go. So whoever asked that question, I can send you some follow-up. I don't have it at my fingertips, but we have had some successes where we've had a program. So for example, Barney, I don't know whether you would call the school that you go to, do you consider that East Side or not?
I live east of Fraser, so
that is East Side. So as a great example, Barney has been running, she's got kids at Richard McBride School, and she's been running a field hockey program there, a school field hockey program there. And we've seen that reflected in our numbers of suddenly we're getting players through from that school and we can identify them. So wherever we put the investment is where we might get players. But there were some interesting things I thought in the findings. One was it's not just that it's West Side, it's actually that we are where the bulk of our players are. If they're in the public school system, they're overwhelmingly in French immersion schools. And I thought that was a really interesting finding in terms of demographically what that says about our membership and maybe where the potential is. Or we could say the opposite and say, okay, well, we're doing really well there. Where else might we build the junior system? We have seen some changes. I'm not sure that we would necessarily, because the option is also to build on our successes. So we have all of the programs, all of the schools, the public schools that have, public high schools that have field hockey programs are on the West Side. And correspondingly, we have all of the feeder schools on the West Side building into those high schools. Those high school programs are vulnerable. They've had declining numbers. So do we actually say, well, really what we could be doing is really increasing our investment in those West Side schools that feed those high schools to make sure that we don't lose the successes that we already have by building those two pieces of the system together. So the elementary school system and the high school system. So I think there's probably opportunities in both places. There's opportunities to maintain the base that we have on the West Side. I don't think we want to lose that. And then do things in other areas, such as Barney's tried, by having a person who's committed to, being able to do this in a school and building it up, building in new places that way. I think Alex has also done work at Britannia, I think as the elementary school at Britannia as well. But I think, Alex, we haven't seen that reflected yet in the numbers, I don't think. But that's potentially because you've been working with the younger kids. I'm not sure.
I think Stephanie's just better at it than I am.
Good. Well, let's clone Barney then, and send her out to all the schools on the West Side and the East Side. But it's I would have to go back and look at the numbers and see to what extent we are still West Side focused. But I know that we have opened up in recent times to other schools as well. Can I ask who asked that question and I can follow up?
Tony.
Tony. Of course it was Tony, being difficult. Thank you, Tony. I will investigate.
I also, Penny can say that Alex and I had a conversation just about this today, looking at for the spring on how we can potentially do some satellite programs for the very young age in terms of player recruitment and things that, so it's something that is in my mind and looking at how we can make it field hockey accessible, knowing that Hamber is kind of the only field. And I was coaching my kids' school, but on grass field. So looking at options that at the younger age, kindergarten to grade 3, kind of that they don't necessarily need to be on the turf, but we can be open to field hockey specific turf, I should say, at the starting, just to hook them in, and then we can expand from there. I have ideas.
Excellent. Thank you, Barney. And we would love, Barney would also, we're incredibly lucky to have her. And anybody who thinks that they might be able to support her in her work, we have a working group and would love some help. Diana, I saw a question pop up and then it disappeared again.
Yeah, I want to say first that there's a lot of support for Doug's idea of coordinating first team matches and getting others out to watch them. See if that scheduling could be coordinated. And somebody's asking for you to comment on the high school league.
Yeah, so I can't comment on that in any depth. It came up. Oh, go ahead, Angus.
It's Scott here. I was actually offering to comment on it.
Oh, good.
As I'm one of the coaches in the high school league. So just coming at, COVID's basically, we have no season this fall due to COVID. Well, one of the problems is that we're running into a real lack of coaching. We lost, Eleanor retired from Killarney, and we're not sure how that program is going to continue without her. Kitsilano, their coach is close to the end of her teaching career. I'm not sure what happens after that, and it's been a really productive program in terms of getting lots of kids to play. Facilities are also a problem. So I coach at Bing. We use a tennis court to try to practice on with kids wrecking their sticks and stuff. So it's not ideal in terms of being able to get kids out onto decent pitches. But the real choke point is going to be whether or not coaches return, teacher coaches in particular, return to coaching as COVID ends. If this goes for 2 years, it won't just be field hockey, but it's going to be almost all of the school sports that are going to struggle as the time vacuum, the time gets filled, right? So if you're, I know that I don't have any extra free time now that I'm not coaching. It's just being used for other things.
Yeah.
And so I think there really is a vulnerability there. And it's not just going to be particular to field hockey, but it's something that if we're looking at the high schools as a feeder program for the club, we're going to need some support in community coaches. Angus has pointed out that community coaches we can't draw on community coaches during COVID for any of the sports. So we're really going to have to sort of relook at it. I'm doing some stuff on the union side to try to get a little more recognition for teachers who do that kind of work. But that's a long uphill battle. Thanks.
Scott, I'm so glad you mentioned that, and thank you. You're much more informed on that question than I am. The connection between the Hawks Club and the high school system, and especially this idea of us we need to be supporting the community in lots of different ways in order for us to be successful. Supporting the high schools, and that had occurred to me as well, that we are. There are a lot of older coaches in the public school, and the number of teams has gone down as well. And so I have been wondering about, is that something that the club should be trying to support somehow? Again, we have to figure out how you do it financially, but it's not just that, using the high schools as a feeder to the program. It's supporting the sport in all of the different ways that we need to. So we're supporting each other. Alex?
I agree. It's about community building. It's not just about feeder systems.
Yeah. Sorry, Alex, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. Just to give an example. So last year we actually did support Van Tech School entered into a sort of ad hoc league that Indy Sembi has been running for a few years out of Hamburg School on Hamburg, where it's not part of the main school's program. It's a sort of his own thing that he's doing. We actually provided and paid for a coach, Ben Harvey, to go and coach Fantech School for 6 weeks to allow them to enter the league. They put together a new team to enter the league, so which speaks to the east side and supporting the school's programs. But that was a very limited and one-time thing. I think we would benefit greatly from a more coordinated and targeted and focused approach. But yeah, it's another area that we have done some work.
Mm. Folks, I'm just looking at the time. Diana, have you got a final question and a process by which we can give answers or continue a conversation in some way with the questions that remain unanswered?
Yeah, well, there's just been a flurry of questions around the idea of high school and junior school programming and comments and suggestions about how to go about doing it. So it might be worth looking at those afterwards and then maybe responding to them and sending it out to everybody.
Okay.
Given that we're running out of time.
Yeah. Good.
Lots of enthusiasm, though.
Good. Well, in that case, I think, firstly, I would like to just thank you all so much for coming tonight. I'm really happy with this turnout, especially given what's going on television or on the networks, wherever you're watching. So the fact that we had 34 people turn up tonight, I'm just delighted. And thank you so much for coming. I look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Take care, and hope you have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Can I just say very quickly, I think that we should all recognize Penny's acting president role over the last year. She jumped in when Andrew left in January to join FHBC. So thank you for organizing this and thank you for all your work, Penny.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Take care.